So Jupyter, for those of you who don't know it, is one of the easiest ways to install it is to install the Anaconda distribution of Python. And Anaconda is kind of the kitchen sink of Python distribution. So if you don't really care to have to deal with packaging and installing packages subsequent to your standard, I mean, you can go and install Python. There is a main distribution for Python 3 here. You can install this thing, of course, on your machine, and then you're dealing though with installing some package manager like pip or something like this thereafter. Now, you still may have to do that for the most of the time, but if you go with Anaconda, you've got all that there, and you've got things like JupyterLab. And JupyterLab is essentially a client server where the front end is a web interface like the one you're seeing. And what it is essentially, it's the IPython notebook turned into a web page. If you have used IPython before, you might be familiar with this idea. And what I kind of like about this is that in addition to, so the idea for a JupyterLab, if I just basically open up here, if I go in and I just take a blank page, so this is already a Python cell. Okay, so I essentially execute this and like Trinket, but I can execute it in line, so I can either press the triangle or I can press Shift Enter. And what I like about this is you get immediate execution and feedback here. So this is all just standard IPython interface, but it's working in the browser. But a nice thing, which I didn't realize, was that this cell can become not just a code cell, but you can actually insert a Markdown cell. I'd noticed this, but I hadn't really paid attention to it. So now this is a Markdown cell, and I can do things like, this is an H1, or if I could spell properly. So I can just use Markdown here. Now the difference between the way these two cells behaves is that in the case of a code cell, the code is retained and the output of that cell is written below. But when it's a Markdown cell, the actual code for the cell is replaced by the output of the cell. So you'll see that when I execute that cell, I'll have my Markdown here. But it gets better, and this is the reason I kind of wanted to show you, because I teach a discrete maths course to the DT249 first years, and one of the things that I was thinking about, how was I going to easily show them the maths markup in an online class setting? Well, thankfully, this thing takes Latic, so I can just embed Latic things here. So I can, do something like A and put in Latic. Well, I'll make, so the set A intersect set B. So now I'm able to bang in math markup inside my the Markdown cell in a Jupyter Notebook. And one of the things I've done with the students this year is I've actually made this part of their learning outcomes. So suppose I'm over here and I'm teaching them something about matrices like this. And I've built this slide in Latic, so I'm able to get all these nice fancy markups for doing matrices and so on. And I'm going through this with them. And what I can do though is I can jump over while we're talking about this notation, and I can go, okay, well, I'll show you how to do this for yourself. So I go to my Jupyter Notebook and I open up this cell and I show them, well, the way I built that matrix was using this Latic here. And so they're now learning two things. They're learning the idea of matrices, and they're also learning how to typeset matrices. And this makes the turning in of their homework much easier for me and for them. Because last year when I taught this class, they had all this idea of very badly handwritten notes and then taking pictures with cameras and submitting them, and you could barely see anything working. Whereas what I get them to do now is actually, as part of the learning outcomes, be able to typeset this mathematics for me and for them. So what I can do then is integrate this mathematics into Python. So I show them sort of three things. One is the theory, blah, blah, blah. This is a this is a that. So I show them that. Then I jump over and I show them, well, and you can typeset your mathematics using these things if you want to represent them. And by the way, you can also represent your matrices in Python. So then I can actually essentially show them, say, for example, using NumPy in this example, how to build a matrix and do things like, let's just jump down and do something interesting like scalar addition, or show them how to do adding matrices, both using the Python built-in libraries or writing the algorithm to do that by hand so that they understand kind of what's going on. And they've already taken a Python course in semester 1 with Mark. So they have enough Python, and I don't do anything super, advanced with them in this. It's just basically loops and if statements, mostly speaking. But what I like about the Jupyter experience is that I can integrate the typesetting and the examples in one kind of flow. And if I have to put in any extra notation or explanations, then I have both Latic and the markup kind of tool at my disposal to do that. So that's been really helpful, particularly being online. Then this is like, it's a godsend to be able to then, I just distribute these notebooks to the students before the class with sort of part of it filled out, and then they join in along with me because they have theirs at home. And the idea is that as I'm typing, they're typing, and a lot of the thing that they're coming back to you with is, oh, something didn't work, or I didn't get this to happen, blah, blah, blah. And then I'd say, okay, share your screen. And then I'd work through the code with them. And then other students see that happening and they can fix their problems and so on. So it's fairly interactive. And now this isn't quite as seamless to get running as Trinket, but it's worth the investment of doing this for the first week or the second week if you're going to complete a 12 or 13-week course. It definitely pays off towards the end. So that's my use of it there. Another nice side effect of this is the way I now do assignments or assessments of any description. So I can basically give the assessment as a notebook. So here's an example of an assignment I've done for the Python group, which sort of outlines, I can basically use the pandas, sorry, the Markdown to typeset the actual document. And then I can include, in this example, I've given them a data set like this, which is just kind of a long form string in Python. And then I've gone and I've said, okay, your challenges are this, write a code to do the following, and then you insert your code here. And then I give them another challenge, and then I can basically include in this, I can put in a little cell here and say, write your solution here, and so on. So what they give back to me is this notebook again, but filled in. So it's convenient for them because they kind of know exactly what to zone into and just focus on, they have to put code here. And in some situations, I might provide part of the solution already done and then show them where they have to fill in their bit, or they have to just fill in the whole cell, or they can write as many cells as they like. And then at the end, I get back the same notebook, but with the stuff filled in, and it's easy then for me to just jump in and go and grade these against some rubric or something. And is there one other thing? Oh yeah, there's for R programmers there, Jupyter Notebook runs this stuff as well. So you can get into, I'm not an R programmer, but you can see here it works. And you can add other languages too. So if I wanted to create a notebook, I've also included, you can do JavaScript and TypeScript. So there's engines you can get for this. It's obviously not going to cooperate with me today. Okay, so that kernel isn't working, I don't think. Is it? No, that's not going to cooperate. But if I had time, I could restart this and make it work. But just the idea is that you can install various other languages in, which is kind of interesting. So if you want to use this for other things as well, then it kind of works like that. So was there anything else I wanted to show you?
Brian, can I just ask, what's the difference between JupyterLab and Jupyter Notebook? Like this semester, for example, I've been using the notebook in Collab.
Oh yeah, so
second years for Python because not because it's kind of, no setup and that, and you can just keep going. But I
Okay,
don't
so
get the difference.
The Collab thing is a hosted Google Cloud backend. Is that right?
Yes.
And then and it runs in like isolated containers and so on. And I just find it really slow to get started on that stuff. I find it painfully annoying actually. But yeah, I can see the attraction. The idea is you put your labs in the cloud and you share the labs. The only difference between Notebook, this is Notebook, but what the Jupyter guys are saying is that they're trying to get people to use Lab because it's just a nicer interface, and this is where they're going with
Lab just a different interface to the regular Notebook?
it is, but you've got nicer interfaces here, and better examples and control over things, and it's got a plug-in system as well, and I think this is where they're headed. I've just moved over to this because it's got nicer features. For example, I can do a presentation mode here, and I can get rid of this tray, and it gets nice and big, and various other things. But I think functionally, as far as doing your Python's concerned, I think it's exactly the same thing at the back end. Remember, the server side of this is going to be just whatever Python server you're running. The lab versus code thing, or notebook, I should say, is just whatever the presentation of the IPython interpreter is going to look like.
And when you did that, did you have any, as in if you asked the student to install that via Anaconda, were there any issues with the setup, which is one of the main reasons why I went with Collab?
Yes,
in the past,
I was bracing myself for lots of problems, and I was expecting to spend quite a bit of time at the beginning of all of these courses dealing with that. But it seems as long as you're dealing with the standard Macintosh or Windows 10, and people are using those, then I haven't seen any issues. Anaconda has become quite stable. So from that perspective, it seems to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
But Collab is a perfectly good idea if you're, I don't know about the resourcing and paying for it though. To what extent you have to pay for, or how much you get for the free side, and is it performant enough?
Well, it depends, of course, like what time you log on. Yes, it is much slower, but at the same time, you can just log in with any free Google account and get going. Your session will be alive or kept for 12 hours, which usually covers anything that you want in with students, and then they can copy all their files and machine learning models and all of that. They can save it on Drive or somewhere else. You can also link it up with AWS and save it there if you wanted to. Depends on what you want to do.
Yeah. No, I like the idea of doing it in a more cloud-oriented fashion, and that's this other project I'm trying to work on as a side thing, getting the WebAssembly port of Python working in a more integrated world. But for that, this is an okay compromise for now. I mean, it's not a great solution for casual learners because there's kind of a high cost to installing this, and that's kind of the market niche that Trinket fills in. But if you're doing a 12 or 13-year course with 40 students, it's well worth investing in the first week and getting this right. And I didn't have any trouble with it so far anyway.
That's great to know.
Okay, I think that's all I had to show you. Most of you will have seen all of this stuff before, but I think the bit that I liked a lot was the use of, where have I got it? Here. Just the use of the Markdown and the Latic markup for the notation and the flow through with the code. Kind of found this a really easy way to teach online with a group of sort of ab initio math students and programmers, because we were able to kind of take it nice and slow and back and forward, And I think they benefited from being able to visualize, what is kind of stodgy stuff presented like this, and then kind of make it become alive in a Jupyter page when it gets a bit more interesting, that you can actually see this stuff working, either both in code but also using the markup itself. And I picked that matrix example because it's probably the most challenging markup you'd ever have to write. The rest of this is, this is fairly ropey, but you can break it down fairly okay, but the rest of the markup for most of the rest of the maths is kind of easy. And the nice thing about LaTeX is it's almost, you can almost imagine what the word is going to be because they're pretty close to the operation names themselves.
Ryan, could I ask you, do you ever find when they submit their notebooks that they've made changes and while they're running it interactively, it works fine, but when they submit it, you can't run it?
Yeah, that happens a lot, particularly with the first years and the international Python course. You often get the stuff in the stuff is broken, but it's usually a very simple, like you can look at it and you can go, okay, I can see what they've done wrong here. You could probably make a one line change to fix it for them to get it working. So you can kind of see where you would give them credit. I haven't come across, except for the people who submit empty notebooks, who didn't even really try. I haven't really come across something that's so unbelievably broken that I couldn't make any head or tail of it. But that is a risk, of course, yeah. But even if I can't run it, I can see the attempt. I can see basically what they've tried to write in a cell. So it's no worse than them submitting code in an editor that I can't read or run either. And the nice thing about this is that rather than me having to fire up a full Python environment like JetBrains or Visual Studio Code and pull in the kitchen sink to make something work, to test that they've submitted correctly, the fact that it's nice and compact and inside the notebook is that if it's working, it just works great. And they usually submit with the cells expanded and the solutions right there for me to view.
And can you do the same in that as you can do in Jupyter Notebook, where you can actually download that as a Python file?
Yeah, I think so. I think I can export Notebook as something.
No, actually, it might be the download. If you have a look at the download, up.
Down is.
Or even save notebook as, yeah.
It could be save notebook as. Yeah, I actually don't know. It's not something I make use of, but I know that it can be done somewhere. Just don't remember where it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Brian. It's great.
Yeah. The reason that I don't make use of it is because the programs I'm writing with most of these classes is not a program top to bottom that makes sense, except perhaps in the machine learning course that I do. But most of these would be just fragments of code that are kind of standalone demonstrations of a concept in of themselves. And if you downloaded the whole lot as one file, it would be totally incoherent. So it really only, in this situation, it only makes sense within the context of the notebook.
Yeah, that's true, because actually you lose all the markdown as well.
Yeah, the whole point of this use case for it is that it's interspersed with Markdown and demonstration and explanations. So then you export to Python, you lose all of the context for that use case. So I'm not using Notebook as a development environment for developing solutions. I mean, I do have standalone solutions within a cell. For example, like, here I've got an implementation, a fully working implementation of adding a matrix, but that's standalone. Okay, that function works. You could download that separately and make it work somewhere, but it really only works in the context of this teaching moment here where I'm showing them how to add matrices. That's all that is really. Okay, that's pretty much it. Any other sort of thoughts or feedback or questions? Anybody else doing something similar with a better idea?
I used that with OR, all right, for the for data visualization with fourth years, and we used Jupyter Notebook though, and it works very well because their visualization charts just stay on the screen, and even when they submit it, sometimes they will forget to include the file load. But I can still see the charts that they had previously generated because the charts are still there in the notebook, because it'll show you the output as well as just the code. Yeah.
So this is another thing I was doing in class last night, using grouping and aggregation in pandas with a class, and then showing them how to do charting as well. So that's sort of, exactly, sort of another example. Yeah.
Hi, Brian. Yeah, very interesting. I hadn't really looked at Jupyter Notebook or any of those kind of things before. What's your thoughts on using it, say, integrated into the likes of PyCharm? You know, have you used it with JetBrains, or is?
Yeah, so you can. I'm not sure. Do I have an example? So I know one thing you can do. I'm not a JetBrains user, but I know one thing you can do, which is very similar, and I bet you JetBrains supports this too. In Visual Studio, the Visual Studio is it? VS Code, so the free one, the one that's written in TypeScript, not the Microsoft IDE, but the VS Code, which is a pretty good editor actually. It has a full extension system as well. And one of the extensions is a Jupyter Notebook extension. So you can read Jupyter Notebooks into VS Code, and then you can get a similar looking interface to this with cells and all the rest of it.
I have it in front of me here. I just, while you were talking, I just going up in
so to answer your question, you could probably have a situation where you could have some tabs as pure .py files.
Yeah.
And you could say be building support libraries in those ones, and then you could have your Jupyter Notebook cell or pages open, and then drive your problem solution through the cell interface, but pulling in the py files from other tabs in the editor. So I think, and I've done that in a machine learning context before, and it works quite well.
Yeah, no, it's not bad. It's you can probably mix them up quite well actually. Like looking at PyCharm, it's just a case of installing a Jupyter library and then kind of making the ARN Python style a notebook file basically.
Yeah. I used to use PyCharm a bit more years ago, and I've just kind of, I actually use VI. I don't use any of these things, but when I'm teaching students, I have to use editor. If I have to use editors that people understand, so I tended to use VS Code. But that's sort of what that's the closest thing I've used. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I missed it at the start. So what's the link to that environment you're running there? Like, how do you get that? I'm sure I know you said it, but I just kind of it flew by me at the start there.
Oh, so this is like Anaconda, the Anaconda distribution of. Right. Right. So you're familiar with Anaconda, I'm sure.
I am. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So
as part of Anaconda, you basically can download this. I'll just show you, because this is not one of the screens I've shared, but I'll show you this now. This is the Anaconda Navigator. This is the GUI that you'll get. And then, like, you don't have to do this. Like, you can completely just go to command line version, as I'm sure you do. But for students, I encourage them to install this thing, and then they get PyCharm Professional. If you, as long as you bring your own license or your education license, you can run that.
Yeah, I always tell them they can, once they sign in with a TU email address there.
Exactly, and then JupyterLab is the one I'm using here, and Bianca was talking about using Notebook, but in the cloud-hosted, the Collab version of that, and then you've got other. I don't use these other things, like Datalore is a JetBrains Collab-like service, but you have to sign up and pay for that, so I'm not interested. Or Studio, I think I'm not an OR programmer, so I presume it's just some front end for OR, and some other kind of stuff as well, which I don't really know much about. But this is the one I'm kind of focusing on. Honestly, the only reason that they install this is just to make it easy to click a button. But there you can click on environments and say, well, what do I want to do? And there's where you add in OR here, and you can look for other environments and install other languages as well.